Welcome to the Property Management Law Solutions Podcast. Your host, Attorney Tim Baldwin, will guide you in all things property management, law, markets, politics, and commentary. Your property is his priority. Here's your host, Attorney Tim Baldwin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Property Management Law Solutions Podcast. We are excited to be here with you. We have, of course, our attorney from Tampa at Property Management Law Solutions, Shannon Alfonso, is joining us today. And then we also have David Seevers is our special guest on the show today. David is a property manager in the panhandle area of Florida. And we're excited to hear about what David has to say, and so we can glean a lot of wisdom from him, and he can tell us about his experiences in this world of property management. So, David, welcome to the show today.
Hi, hey everybody. Thanks for having me.
So, tell the audience just a little bit about yourself, David, so we can get to know you better, and we'll kind of just have a conversation about some interesting topics.
Sure. So, I guess I've been involved in property management since I think 2013-ish timeframe. Worked for a few years in another property management company, and then started up our company in the fall of 2017 with your help, actually. So, that was an interesting ride, and here we are. The beginning of 2024, and we're just moving along strong. It's been a great time. I've got a wife and a 3-year-old for those that care about personal sorts of things, and I spend most of my time either with them or dealing with property management stuff.
A working man with a family. There you go.
That's right.
And what's the name of the property management company?
It's Service Matters Property Management. We're actually kind of a triumvirate these days. We've got a real estate side, an association management side, and then I spend my days dealing with our property management firm.
So I can't remember if you are a broker or if you're a sales associate at this point. I can't remember.
I'm a sales associate, struggling to find time to finish my broker. I've finished the course. I've just got to do the studying to take the state exam and get it done. So I'm on the cusp. I'm right there at the final yard.
That's always the struggle of taking the next step, is finding that time to devote.
Sure.
I'm sure you'll have that under wraps here soon. And then who's the broker of your company?
So Pete Morgan and Suzanne Morgan are the active brokers. They're my in-laws as well, and so they are the owners and the brokers of the company.
Makes for interesting days, I'm sure, David.
Yeah. Well, holidays. We talk a lot of business at the holidays. So.
Yeah. Well, Pete is a retired, is it Navy officer?
That's right. Yes. He flew helicopters in the Navy for many, many years, and then went to the Pentagon for a period of time and retired from there. So
yeah. Pete's a good guy. So is Suzanne. They're great people to deal with. If you're in the local area around Pensacola, Pace, Milton, they're good people to know, especially if you have need for service of property management. But let's talk about property management. That's why people probably are listening. They want to learn more about the business and just gather from other people's experiences. So you've been at this now for 10 years or so, and you're the head of the Service Matters Property Management team. Is there, what would you say right now is sort of a topic or an issue or a problem that you see that people don't quite maybe fully understand, or it's just kind of a unique or bizarre sort of set of circumstances in the property management world?
Well, there are a lot of unique situations. I mean, obviously, coming out of the COVID years, there's been a lot of uniqueness. You could talk about things like lag time. You could talk about the boom in the real estate market as a whole and how we're now seeing the impacts of that. I am really interested in distressed properties right now and looking at those. It's something that we kind of stumbled into. I wasn't exactly looking for that as a property manager. I don't know that anybody is, but I think there's a lot of opportunity around working with landlords who have problem homes that gets overlooked because everybody's looking for that perfect 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom that's going to rent for 8, 9, or 18 or 1900,000, 18,000 or
1,800 or 1,900.
1,800. Thank you. I had a brain fart there for a second. Like I know it.
I knew where you were going, David. I'll tell you what, if you're renting a property for $18,000 a month.
Yes, yeah. So come and see me, right? I've got the magic, right?
There you go. So what do you consider a distressed property?
Well, I think it can go a couple of different ways, and I don't think either of these are going to be a secret. You're either talking about a property that has a lot of deferred maintenance on it, or you're talking about a property where the tenant is either well behind in rent, or maybe is just a bad tenant overall and is causing problems in the home that need to be resolved, or any combination thereof, those two big items there.
What would you say as an owner who comes to you and says, "Hey, I want you to manage this property"? What do you kind of look at when you determine, is this sort of what I would consider distressed or not? Do you have a process that you go through to make sure, or to know essentially what you're dealing with?
Sure. Well, you want to get as much background as you possibly can about the home. If you can get a copy of the ledger to see where the tenant is in terms of the rent payments, that's great. If you can get out to the property to get eyes on it, if you have an inspector on your team that specializes in doing that kind of work, having them go and take a look at the property, see where the maintenance issues might be. Just getting as much information in advance on the home is a good idea. You also kind of want to get a sense of the landlord too, because while not always the case, sometimes a home becomes distressed because you're dealing with a landlord who either refuses to or just doesn't have the ability to maintain that property properly. And so as you're kind of looking at that whole picture, I think the first thing you want to consider is whether or not the landlord who's asking you to take on this property is able and willing to do the hard work of bringing the home up to its real potential.
So I know that there's situations where, if you're trying to grow your numbers, your unit numbers under management, there's always these sort of awkward scenarios, you might say, to when an owner comes to you with, say, 30 units or 50 units. Maybe it's partly single family. It could be part, duplex, fourplex, eightplex.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so you have this portfolio, if you will, of different types of properties. So it could potentially be a, good revenue source for you. But you sort of have to taking the good with the bad.
Right.
And sometimes that's a difficult scenario because, quite frankly, a lot of property managers don't want to have to deal with the distressed properties that you're talking about. So when it comes to having this conversation with the owner of realistic expectations with the variety of properties that the owner has, what would you say is the biggest resistance that you will get from an owner as it relates to the distressed properties, and what your recommendations would be to essentially, avoid liability, making sure you're maximizing rent potential, making sure the tenants have a good experience in the property? What is the biggest hurdle that you find owners have with dealing with that property?
Again, I think the scenario, and I kind of brushed over this, so let me kind of dig into this a little bit more. the scenario that's bringing this landlord to you is kind of important. If they have had these properties under management by another company, and that company has caused the portfolio, maybe again, not all of it, but enough of it to become distressed that we call it a distressed portfolio. If the company has kind of caused that, then, again, you've got to do your due diligence and make sure that you understand what's going on. But if you've got a landlord who is willing to really tighten down and bring the whole thing up to standard, then I think you have the opportunity for a good relationship. Now, you need to have a really candid conversation about that. You need to sit down, you need to talk through what are the problem areas and make sure that the landlord has an understanding of what it's going to take to get to that, optimum level for the property. And you kind of have to lay it out. You have to show them where the goal is, where it is you're headed to, where you think that home can be. But you have to take them through the process of what it's going to take, whether it's removing tenants, whether it's just doing a lot of maintenance while a tenant's in place. Maybe it's both. Maybe the tenant would be a good tenant, but the maintenance has just gotten to a place where the tenant has to go in order for you to be able to do the things that you need to do to get the home back up and running. But just really having a good conversation about that whole process. And you're really going to be taking your cues from that owner. You need to see where the pain points are for them, and you want them to be open and honest with you. Because if you're going to do it, it's got to be an alliance. You've got to be able to depend on that owner to cut the checks that have to be cut and make the decisions that have to be made. And that owner is going to be depending upon you for your experience and expertise and resources to be able to get the job done effectively and in a timely sort of manner. So if the two of you are on the same page there, it will work. And then otherwise, if you can't come to those terms, then you're just going to have to go and find someone else to work with in that situation. Let them do what they can by themselves.
So, I mean, this business is very interesting because as a matter of perspective, many times the public tends to think that the landlord just has all this money available to do whatever it is that maybe should be done or could be done to make the property better, to improve it, and that landlords don't want to do that. But the reality of it is that many times the amount of money that's being brought in from rent doesn't really cover all the service debt on the property. So you have mortgage, taxes, maintenance, property management, legal fees. I mean, the list goes on. The amount of cost that it takes just to rent a property out is a lot, and they're going up. So now landlords have a problem with really just having enough reserve on hand to deal with not just the normal maintenance, but also the big stuff that comes up. So as a matter of budgeting, how does a landlord prepare for the day of these big ticket items and the normal sort of routine maintenance? How do you advise them on budgeting for those things?
Sure. So that is a good question. And that really kind of speaks to a situation that you should hopefully have in place before a property becomes distressed. A lot of new landlords, and again, you say the public, and I think we can lump new landlords, people who are just becoming landlords for the first time, into this group. They have this expectation that they're going to rent the home. It's going to be this passive source of income, and they can immediately start applying whatever excess they have to, other bills or to other investments, things of that nature. The mentality that you really have to have as a landlord is that, passive is not the right word. It is a passive source of income, but it is an active business. And if you're not forward thinking, if you're not looking out on that horizon and preparing your business for future obstacles, then you're putting yourself in a problem situation. I always tell landlords, you need to kind of set up some goals initially for yourself. And then once you've completed those goals as far as saving funds goes, then you can start looking at ways to allow that money to do other things for you. But my first, suggestion is always you need at least 3 or 4 times your mortgage payment in a savings account, just hanging out as a rainy day fund for some of these bigger ticket items, and also for eventualities or possibilities like an eviction, and of course, even 3 or 4 times. What's that?
So that never happens.
No, it rarely does, But then, beyond that, and of course, I'm not an accountant and I'm not a financial advisor either, but there are other avenues that a lot of folks can pursue, that often kind of get missed. Lines of credit through a bank can oftentimes assist with maintenance that's kind of gone deferred. You hate to do it, but you can always look at a credit card if you've got one. That's in this day and age with rates, at 19, 20, 24%. That's a great idea. But if you have a low interest credit card, if you're one of the lucky people to have a 3, 4, 5, 6% credit card, sometimes that's just kind of the bullet you have to bite, for those types of situations when they pop up if you haven't prepared yourself. But the best thing you can do is try and prepare yourself and create some sort of reserve fund for those rainy days, which will come. It's just a matter of when. So,
hey there, David. This is Shannon.
Hey, Shannon.
I know Tim's been talking a bunch here. He got that new camera and he looks so good. He's like, oh, look at me.
I had to, whatever helps, Shannon, whatever helps.
So David, I was wondering if you could talk about some of the trends right now in the rental property ownership. It's my understanding there's a lot of owners coming in or investors coming in and competing maybe with some of the people that you represent. In buying up those properties and what you see in that area.
Sure. Well, and I would say this too, just as a caveat. Every region is going to be a little bit different. And so I'm going to speak mostly from what we're seeing in the panhandle, Florida, which in some ways is going to translate universally, but not exclusively. I mean, there are going to be ways that every market is a little bit different. And I would say that in the panhandle, in some ways, we're always a little bit behind the times. There are things that arrive in the panhandle that have been elsewhere for years, possibly. And a lot of that's due to our market being smaller than a lot of large urban areas like, say, Atlanta or Orlando or, Miami, those types of larger metropolitan areas. But it's also unique, too, in that we have a different kind of market with so many very active military bases. And of course, there are other parts of the country that have those as well, but we've got so many and really unique in the turnover time because a lot of our military personnel are in the area for, 7, 8 months, a year at the most, and then they're gone. So there's a different sort of dynamic there when you're talking about turnover, which is not something that most investor owners are interested in. They want to try and find, well, nobody is, right? Everybody wants long-term tenants, but especially when you've got a lot of properties and you're trying to negotiate the financials of those properties, having tenants in place for a longer period of time is certainly helpful. But one of the things that we have begun to see in this area, which has kind of really slowed our market down, is, well, it hasn't slowed our market down, but on individual level, it seems like it's slower, is we've seen an increase in build to rent communities. We've had just over the past couple of years, 3 of those communities pop up in our little suburb of Pace, Florida. And they just weren't there before. And so you have we've gone from, having, just as an example, 30 or so active properties in the 32571 zip code this time a couple of years ago till now. If you went and looked at 32571 on Zillow, you'd see as many as like 80 available rentals. And so there's just been a real swelling up of potential rentals, which means that it's become a renter's market, right? They've got more access to different properties. They can be a little choosier. They can really search for that home that gives them everything they want and also doesn't break the bank. And as little as a couple of years ago, you just didn't have that option. So I think that one of the things that a lot of our owners are having to come to terms with is managing the expectations of the rental income. And I know I suffer from this. I have such a short-term memory, and so I'm thinking, well, back in 2021, 2022, I could rent this house for $1,800, $1,900. And so that's where my mind is. And that's where the owner's mind is. And now as they're looking at purchasing new homes to add to their portfolio, a lot of times we're still thinking in that mindset, oh, this is an $1,800 and $1,900 rental. And you really need to make sure you're doing your due diligence. Well, is that what the market is showing us right now? And a lot of times it's not. A lot of times now we're seeing those rents reduced by, $100, $200, $300 from what they were. And so you just have to make sure that you're in the moment and not getting caught up by what was the rental market of the past.
But what's interesting about the build for rent space is that it's effectively an apartment, but single family units.
Right.
So of course the apartments are being built everywhere. I mean, we're seeing them
Sure.
down in Tampa. I'm sure Shannon's seen them pop up everywhere. So the apartment space is built on volume. And so you can, that's what they're leveraging. They're leveraging volume in the market. But with build for rent, it's almost like they are trying to have both worlds, and they can do it quite effectively because there's a lot of renters out there who don't want to live in an apartment, or the apartments aren't big enough for their family. So they have to rent a single family home. But the build for rent is also based on volume. So they can leverage the numbers for a lower rent amount. It's not always across the board, but they're in a better position than an owner who may have, 5 single family units who can't leverage the volume as a matter of sort of diffusing expenses across the board. And so going to the distressed properties, what you're starting off with is that for the owners who have those types of properties, they're going to find themselves in a precarious situation because, first of all, there's costs involved with getting the property up to a reasonable market rate. And making sure that the tenants have an enjoyable experience while they're there so they avoid turnover. But the other part of this is that there's just greater risk of liability when you have a property that's not maintained the way it should be, whether it's, habitability issues or the tenants raising, concerns time after time after time. And now you're having to spend time and resources of sending people out, assessing, estimating, fixing things here and there. And so that amount of expense and resources being spent on those kinds of homes actually now diminish the return on that property, which then, sort of prevents you from being able to reinvest the money back into that property. So it's sort of a downward spiral. And it could be a problem for owners in that situation.
It can. And the thing that you have to there are 2 things that you have to keep in mind. One, you have to, again, set that realistic expectation of what is the potential for that distressed home. And of course you do have, you've got the problem of how do I get to that place where the home is actually ready to to be marketed for the rental value that it deserves, right? But the flip side of that is, I mean, if I have, just as an example, if I've got a home that's really worth, if it were really put together properly and it's really worth, it's worth $1,400 a month in rent, let's just say, but it's renting for $1,000. If I am, even if I'm just a little liquid at $1,000 a month, even if I'm just making a little bit of money in that situation, right? Then any amount above that I get is just, I'm getting ahead. Now, of course, I've not been investing as far as, the maintenance goes, right? But if I can get it to the place where it's $1,100 a month, right, then I'm ahead of the game. If I get it to the place where it's $1,200, so every step forward I take, I'm ahead. I was in the game to begin with, and now I'm just that much further ahead from my financial perspective. The other thing to keep in mind too is, a lot of times I can rent that home for perhaps less than what the market value is and still make that owner solvent. Because the truth is, a lot of these distressed properties are older homes, right? I mean, that's a part of the equation that we haven't really discussed yet. A lot of times these distressed properties are they're not brand new. I mean, if they were brand new, everything, be fresh flooring, fresh paint, new appliances, all that good stuff, right? So a lot of times these homes are 20 plus years old. And so there's already been a pretty significant investment in the mortgage over that time. Maybe it's already paid off, right? So if you've got, so in some ways, that owner of that distressed property is ahead of the game in a way that a landlord of a brand new home is not. Yeah. They're dealing with a smaller mortgage payment, if one at all. Their tax bill is probably not as large. So they have some advantages that allow them to compete in the market in a way that someone who's just purchased a home 2 years ago and is trying to turn it into a rental can't. They have disadvantages, right? I mean, we're dealing with maintenance issues. That's why it's a distressed property in the first place. But what you do is you leverage the advantages to effectively correct the problems. And then if you can deal with those pain points and push through, when you get on the other side, you've effectively got a property that's in a better position than a lot of these homes where you've got a first-time landlord that's just coming in after having lived in the home for a couple of years themselves. So. Yep.
Well, we're at our 2-minute mark here, Dave, so I'm going to respect your time and conclude the show. But, from our side of it, Shannon's and mine, as the attorneys dealing with properties, rental properties and helping landlords, clearly there is benefit in having a property manager who knows what he's doing, knows what he's looking for, helping to reduce your liabilities, increase your revenue, and to help those distressed properties get to the level that they need to be so that the owner can, realize the real potential for that property. So, again, if you're listening to the show, David Seevers is our guest. He's with Service Matters Property Management in Milton, Florida, or Pace, Florida. I'm sorry. David, there is a difference.
But we service Milton and Pensacola.
And Pensacola, that's right. You do the whole area. But, look them up. Look David Seevers up at Service Matters Property Management. And he's a great guy and has a great team working with him. So, David, listen, we appreciate your time today. Appreciate your input on these discussions. And hopefully we'll talk to you here in the near future.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, y'all. Thanks for listening to the show. We'll see you on the next one.